you are said to have
living with their daughter in a hut at the edge of a dark wood.
Before the book came out, Paul and I did not exactly a world tour, but a tour in which we did presentations in the United States and Canada and Portugal. But the most interesting of the presentations we did was here in Buenos Aires at the book fair. It was a project that began, I think, around 2006. But Paul and I had made contact earlier than that because he was editing this 4-volume edition of Beckett's work, Samuel Beckett's works, and he contacted me and asked whether I would edit one of the volumes in the series. And so we began exchanging letters on the practical matter of editing. Later, at a literary festival in Australia, we actually met, and that was where the project for the Book of Letters began.
Sometime later, maybe a month or so later, John wrote me a letter, and he said, I propose perhaps that we do some kind of collaboration because it's too bad we're so far apart. It's going to be very hard to see each other. But maybe by doing something together, we can keep the friendship going that we started in Australia. So I thought this was a good idea, but he said, I'm not really sure what. At first, he proposed doing something about Beckett, and I said, no, enough. I can't do it. I've just done that other project, and little by little, we figured out that perhaps the best thing to do would simply be to exchange letters about any topic we wanted, as if we were living in the same city and had dinner once a month, say. So it'd be a kind of table talk, but better than that, written out and more clearly thought out as well.
July 14th, 15th, 2008. Dear Paul, I have been thinking about friendships, how they arise, why they last, some of them so long. Friendship, it would seem, remains a bit of a riddle. We know it is important, but as to why people become friends and remain friends, we can only guess. Unlike love or politics, which are never what they seem to be, friendship is what it seems to be. Friendship is transparent.
Dear John, the best and most lasting friendships are based on admiration. This is the bedrock feeling that connects two people over the long term. When we are very small, before our erotic lives begin, there is no distinction. Friendship and love are one. Marriage is above all a conversation, and if husband and wife do not figure out a way to become friends, the marriage has little chance of surviving.
Men fall in love with women who remind them of their mothers, or rather, who both remind them and don't remind them of their mothers, who are and are not their mothers at the same time. True? Maybe, maybe not. Interesting? Definitely.
Friendship is a component of marriage, but marriage is an ever-evolving free-for-all, a continual work in progress, a constant demand to reach down into one's depths and reinvent oneself in relation to the other. Whereas friendship, pure and simple, that is, friendship outside marriage, tends to be more static, more polite, more superficial.
Whom do men choose as friends? Other men of roughly the same age with similar interests, say the books. True? Maybe. Interesting? Definitely not. One can have friends without wanting to see them, says Charles Lamb. True and interesting too, another way in which amicable feelings are unlike erotic attachments.
Men tend not to talk about how they feel, period. And if you don't know how your friend feels, or what he feels, or why he feels, can you honestly say that you know your friend?
A remark by Christopher Tietjens in Ford Madox Ford's Parade's End, that one goes to bed with a woman in order to be able to talk to her. Implication? That turning a woman into a mistress is only a first step. The second step, turning her into a friend, is the one that matters.
We crave friendships because we are social beings, born from other beings and destined to live among other beings until the day we die. And yet, think of the quarrels that sometimes erupt in even the best marriages, the passionate disagreements, the hot-headed insults, the slammed doors and broken crockery. And one quickly understands that such behavior would not be countenanced within the decorous rooms of friendship. Friendship is good manners, kindness, steadiness of affect. Friends who shout at each other rarely remain friends. Husbands and wives who shout at each other usually stay married, often happily married.
Friendship is what it seems to be. Friendship is transparent.
Dear John, this is a question.
Dear Paul, I have been thinking
John,
about
Brooklyn, July 29th.
I've been wanting to write to you about India.
All the other points in your letter I haven't addressed. With
Letter to P.A. Dear Paul, toward
Meanwhile,
the end of
America debates whether we should start dropping
down to the details of the hunch.
with warmest thoughts from hot
Yours
New York.
fraternally.
Anything for a friend.
All best,
Paul.
John.
In my early 20s, I was deeply involved in chess. I had the good sense to abandon computers and then made my way to the United States to do a graduate degree. On board ship, crossing the Atlantic, I entered a chess competition and made it through to the final round, where my opponent was to be an engineering student from Germany named Robert. Our match commenced at midnight. At dawn, we were still hunched over the chessboard. Robert was one piece up, but I felt I had the tactical advantage. The last few spectators around the board drifted away. They wanted to get a sight of the Statue of Liberty. Robert and I were alone. "I'll give you a draw," Robert offered. "Okay," I said. We stood up, shook hands, put away the chess set.
I haven't played chess in years, by the way, but for me as well, there was a time in my early 20s when I became immersed in it. It is without question the most obsessive, most mentally damaging game invented by man.
But the mood of the contest would not leave me, a mood of cerebral excitement, feverish and slightly sick, like a real inflammation of the brain. I had no interest in my surroundings. Something kept humming inside me. All I wanted was to be alone so that I could replay the chess game on paper and settle the dot that nagged me. I pored over my notations, following a hunch that I should never have accepted a draw, that in 3 or 4 or 5 moves, Robert the German would have been forced to capitulate. In a quiet way, I was raving mad.
After a while, I found myself dreaming about chess moves in my sleep and decided that I had to stop playing or else go mad.
What I associate with competition is not pleasure at all, but a state of possession in which the mind is focused on a single absurd goal to defeat some stranger in whom one has no interest, whom one has never seen before, and one will never see again. The memory of undergoing that fit of nasty exaltation nearly half a century ago has fortified me forever against wanting to be the winner at all costs, to defeat some or other opponent and come out on top. I have never played chess since then.
Your chess match with the stranger on the ship brought you face to face with some demonic part of yourself, and when you saw what you had become, you recoiled in disgust. I've never had a similar revelation. I don't think, in fact, that I've ever been as hungry to win a match of any kind as you were with that German fellow in 1965.
Here was where everyone was dancing at the end of Blue in the Face. Now it's just a bleak winter day, and you can't imagine that this was a place of the imagination before. You know, John and I both grew up in a time when letter writing was common. The task of writing to John, or the pleasure, just the activity of writing to him, was something that I had to carve out time because I took it seriously. I didn't want to dash off silly things. I thought about what I was writing, tried to make it as well written as anything I could possibly do. So there were days I would take off from my other work and just concentrate on writing to him. You know, often on a weekend or something like that. And it wasn't as if we were writing constantly. I bet you there were probably, on average, about 2 letters a month, I would guess, 2 or 3, or sometimes 1.
in fact, it's this relationship about which it's not possible to say very much, except that it exists and is unpredictable to an extent. People hit it off or they don't hit it off, and Paul and I certainly hit it off from the beginning. We are, in some sense, the same kind of person, the same kind of intellectual formation, the same literary masters in many cases, Beckett being one of them.
February 23rd, 2010. Dear John, concerning your letter, I don't see any flaw at the heart of Giving Offense, which I consider to be an excellent book. And I doubt that the reason you are thick-skinned vis-a-vis your reviewers has anything to do with the fact that you earned your living as a teacher. You believe in your work, that's all there is to it. You believe in it and know that it's good.
I think that for once you are wrong about me. I don't have a great deal of faith in what I'm doing. To be more precise, I have enough faith to get me through the writing itself, enough faith or perhaps enough hope, blind or blinkered hope, that if I give the project at hand enough time and attention, it will work, will not be a palpable failure. But that is where my faith or hope runs out. I don't have much faith that my work will endure.
Forgive me if you feel I've misjudged you. I imagine my comments were a reflection of my own unbounded faith in your work. Of course you live with doubts and insecurities and a belief that your books will not endure. So do I. So I would think does every writer who is not certifiably insane. It is an inner condition, which has nothing to do with the good or bad things reviewers might say about us, since they always seem to praise for the wrong reasons, just as they condemn for the wrong reasons, which disqualifies them from serious consideration as arbiters of literary merit.
Not marble nor the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme. That's what true faith sounds like. I can't echo it.
Every writer judges himself, most often harshly, which is probably why writers keep writing, in the vain hope they will do better next time. But just because you, JC, live in doubt about yourself doesn't mean that I, as your reader of many years, need have any doubts about your work. As for one's response to reviews, it might simply be a matter of temperament, the thick-skinned versus the thin-skinned. Perhaps you are thick-skinned, at least when it comes to the remarks of strangers. I would not describe myself as thin-skinned, but thin-skinned enough to be happy with my decision not to read reviews anymore.
Now and again, I have visions of you in this apartment, which, in my imagination, is painted white, well lit, and windowless. There you sit, hour after hour, day after day, wrapped in your thoughts. Seeing you thus, I feel a certain fraternal tenderness for you and your dogged, unappreciated bravery. Of course, I know there is another public face you wear, that of the admired man of letters. But I am convinced my vision of you as voluntary prisoner of the muse is more true. The world is at his feet, I think to myself, yet there he is at 8:30 every morning, unlocking the door of his cell, checking in for the new day's punishment.
And no, what you say is not entirely bullshit, and I am touched, in fact deeply touched, that you understand me well enough by now to know that the most significant part of my life takes place within the silence of those four walls. The word bravery might be a bit excessive. I've never thought of myself as brave. but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate the thought. With warmest greetings to you and Dorothy, Paul.
Dorothy and I are back from France, and I am halfway through the purgatory of readjusting to Australian time. I snatch at sleep whenever it offers itself, day or night, but for the most part, I wander around the house feeling like death.
I don't want to meddle in your private business, but what you report about your sleep problems disturbs me. If I were in your position, I would surely go half mad. One simply cannot survive in a state of permanent exhaustion. It occurs to me that it might have something to do with traveling, your frequent trips to Europe, and the wrenching discombobulation of trying to cope with shifting time zones, especially because you live in Australia, which is devilishly far from everything.
Curiously, I find it easier to sleep in Western Europe, which happens to share a time zone with my natal South Africa, than in Australia. Perhaps even after 9 years, my organism has not adjusted to the antipodes.
Well, what I enjoyed most was never knowing when the next letter would come. So when something did come, I was always really eager to see what he had to say. And then it would trigger off responses, and I was always eager to respond quickly. I didn't usually sit on them a long time, his letters. If he wrote, within 2 or 3 days, I was forming my response. Sometimes the very same day, I would start writing back. So I think what was the most enjoyable thing was the unexpected. You never never knew when it was going to happen next, and you never knew what he was going to say next. And I hope he felt the same way about what he was getting from me as well.
July 4th, 2010. Dear Paul, thanks for your letter of May 11th, reporting on your visit to what you call the land of torment. I don't sympathize much with today's Israelis, or at least with those who voted Netanyahu into office. But having lived through the 1970s and 1980s in South Africa, I find the mixture of paranoia, belligerence, and pessimism that you describe all too familiar. P.S. I have no wish to extend the discussion of South African history unnecessarily, but if there had been no Cold War, the whole South African mess would have been settled much earlier. For decades, the South African regime represented itself as a bastion against Russian penetration into minerals-rich sub-Saharan Africa. And one U.S. administration after another bought that story.
Dear John, we have returned from the land of torment. All the fears I had about going back to Israel after 13 years have been borne out by what I saw and heard and felt there. Even I, a Jew born 1 year before the founding of the State of Israel, am no less divided than you are. I would not go so far as to call Israel an apartheid state, but it is very close to a Jim Crow society, which is depressing enough.
Your dismay and my dismay. The shared dismay of two aging gents at the way the world is going. How does one escape the entirely risible fate of turning into Gramps, the old codger who, when he embarks on one of his back in my time discourses, makes the children roll their eyes in silent despair. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, said my father, and his father before him, and so on, back to Adam.
Dear Gramps, I've always wondered how the world, which is very large, can fit into something as small as a handbasket. Let the young roll their eyes when we speak. Let the not-so-young ignore what we say. We must carry on with utmost vigilance, scorned prophets crying into the wilderness. But just because we know we are fighting a losing battle, that doesn't mean we should abandon the fight.
In the letters is the return to religion, the way in which religion, which the two of us in our different ways had thought would kind of slowly vanish from the scene of history, has come back with a vengeance, particularly in the form of radical Islamism. I think that both of us are, in a way, children of the Enlightenment, now aging and not quite able to understand this new world. And also both of us a little aware that complaining about the way that history is going, complaining about what's happening to the world, is something that aging people do generation after generation. And both of us want not to fall into that predictable role, and yet both of us feel that we have something to say about the real world, which at the same time we doubt. And that's part of the book, I think.
Politics, I think, could have been explored more too, but of course we only did 3 years, and this wasn't our full-time job, and we could have gone on for 5 years or 10 years, but I think the project would have run out of steam otherwise. I think by having a fixed time, which we extended, was enough. I think our enthusiasm was maintained that way.
October 23rd, 2009. Dear John, something is gone now that used to be there. I don't know if artists themselves are to be blamed for this loss. There are probably too many factors involved to blame anyone in particular. One thing is certain, however. Stupidity has increased on all fronts. My only consolation is that art forges on in spite of everything. It is an unquenchable human need, and even in these grim times, there are countless numbers of good writers and artists, even great writers and artists. And even if the audience for their work has grown smaller, there are still enough people who care about art and literature to make the pursuit worthwhile.
Something happened, it seems to me, in the late 1970s or early 1980s, as a result of which the arts yielded up their leading role in our inner life. I'm quite prepared to give heed to diagnoses of what happened between then and now that have a political or economic or even world historical character. But I do nevertheless feel that there was a general failure among writers and artists to resist the challenge to their leading role, and that we are poorer today for that failure. (21F). Dear Paul, you say that the title pages of French translations of your books read traduit de l'américain. Mine say traduit de l'anglais sud-africain. I'd like someone to point to the moments when my anglais becomes sud-africain. To me, it reads like anglais purged of markers of national origin, and a little bloodless for that reason.
South African English, later tempered by your long stays in the lands of British English, American English, and Australian English. There's also Irish English, Indian English, Caribbean English, and God knows what else. Just as the English no longer own cricket and soccer, they no longer own English.
You point out that there is such a thing as American English or Indian English, and imply that these Englishes have mother tongue status in the United States and India, respectively. But the truth is that on the page, leave aside in the mouth or in the street, these differ from English only in trivial respects, the odd locution or idiom here and there, not the elemental vocabulary which has such determinative power over the speaker's epistemology, or the syntax which dictates the forms of thought.
You were born in a bilingual country, which complicates matters considerably. But if you spoke English at home when you were a child, then you are first and foremost an English speaker.
I thought of the English language as the property of the English, people who lived in England, but who had also sent out members of their tribe to live in and, for a while, rule over South Africa. The English made up the rules of English as they whimsically chose, including the pragmatic rules, in which situations you had to use which English locutions. People like myself followed at a distance and behaved as instructed.
Really fine black pen.
Very fine.
Yeah.
Well, which one are you notable?
It doesn't really
Try this one.
As Derrida remarks, how can one ever conceive of a language as one's own? English may not, after all, be the property of the English of England, but it is certainly not my property. Language is always the language of the other. Wandering into language is always a trespass. And how much worse if you are good enough at English to hear in every phrase that falls from your pen echoes of earlier usages, reminders of who owned the phrase before you.
The numbers tell stories, and behind the blank wall of their anonymity, they're just as alive and evocative as the Elysian fields of Paris. Mention to a New Yorker the following streets, and his mind will swarm with images. 4th Street, Greenwich Village. 14th Street, the cheapest stores in the city. 34th Street, Herald Square, Macy's, illuminated Christmas decorations. 42nd Street, Times Square, legitimate theaters. Give my regards to Broadway. 59th Street, the Plaza Hotel and the grand entrance to Central Park. 125th Street, Harlem, the Apollo Theater, Duke Ellington's song about the A train. Just 2 blocks up from 55th Street on West 57th, there is the building in which my grandfather used to have his office. Intense childhood memories of going in there and being allowed to play with the typewriters and adding machines, which happens to be the same building that for many years housed the New York Review of Books. Intense memories from early adulthood of sitting with Bob Silvers as we discussed the pieces I had written for him. So that the mere mention of 57th Street will summon forth for me an entire archaeology of my past. Memories layered on top of other memories. The primordial dig.
I think, in a way, I would have been willing to pursue certain things longer. And then I got the feeling sometimes John got bored. He would just drop it and start something else. And I was always happy to do that. But I thought there was probably more to say about friendship. And even though we wrote about it at length, and even more about sports, which probably is not the most compelling subject in the world. And yet there's something interesting about thinking about sports because it's such a big business. It's so much a part of the world now, it's particularly the Western world, but just about everywhere. There's something deep about it.
There's pleasure in the new, but also pleasure in the known. The pleasure of eating food one likes, the pleasure of sex. No matter how exotic or complex one's erotic life might be, an orgasm is an orgasm, and we anticipate them with pleasure because of the pleasure they have given us in the past. Still, one does feel rather stupid after spending an entire day in front of a television set, watching young men hurl their bodies against one another. The books sit on the table unread. You don't know where the hours have gone, and even worse, your team is lost.
Like you, I think that watching sport on television is mostly a waste of time. Sport teaches us more about losing than about winning, simply because so many of us don't win. What it teaches above all is that it is okay to lose. Losing is not the worst thing in the world, because in sports, unlike in war, the loser doesn't get to have his throat cut by the winner. You lose most of the time, but as long as you stay in the game, there will always be a tomorrow, a fresh chance to redeem yourself.
I thought what was interesting about the project was that we were registering the history of our times. This is 2010 to 2012, perhaps. Registering it in letter form before we could really understand what was going on around us. I'm talking particularly about world events.
And at first, he said, well, let's do it for 2 years. And then after 2 years, we decided, well, another year. So we did it for 3 years. And pretty faithfully, regularly, we sent back and forth letters to each other, always knowing that they were going to be published. So it wasn't a spontaneous correspondence in the sense that we just wrote it and then later someone else collected the letters. No, this was a book project from the start. Of course, many of the things we wrote are not in the book.
Then there's the French edition with an even younger picture of Paul on the cover. Chinese, Swedish, Hebrew, Turkish, German, French, Catalan, Spanish, Hungarian, Polish, all over the world.
A couple of days ago, I had a startling revelation about the effect our correspondence has had on me. We have been at it for close to 3 years now, and in that time you have become what I would call an absent other, a kind of adult cousin to the imaginary friends little children invent for themselves. I discovered that I often walk around talking to you in my head, wishing you were with me so I could point out the strange-looking person who just walked past me on the sidewalk. So there you are, John, inside my head as I talk to you. Nothing like this has ever happened to me, probably because I have never corresponded with anyone so regularly, and the effect, I can assure you, is an entirely pleasant one.
Of course we are true friends. We could even be blood brothers if you want. Next time we see each other, we can do one of those blood mixing rituals.